For this video we're going to take a look at how to process an infrared image. Here's the image on the screen. It was shot using a Olympus EM5 camera that had been converted to shoot infrared. You can see here that the majority of the tones are in the center of the histogram and well spread out, so we haven't got any exposure clipping. It was shot on a very bright day with lots of infrared light around, and that really is one of the keys to getting a good result with an infrared camera. You need bright light. At the moment the image is looking rather red, and that's because of the way that Adobe interpret infrared files. Down here in the camera calibration, the first thing we can do is change now to an infrared profile that is much better suited for this camera. If you haven't got an infrared profile for your camera, you can create one. We cover that in a different tutorial. First thing then is, once you've applied the camera calibration, you can switch to the basic tab and you need to set the white balance. So I'm going to use the white balance sampling tool, and I'm going to place it just on a point that I know to be a white balance, which is basically any of the foliage. So we click that, you see a slight change in the colours now, and we can now move on to process the image properly. Now the thing I want to do is make sure that all the white foliage remains white, and I want to use the contrast tools as well to try to create some deeper blacks here as well. You'll notice the image is in colour at the moment, so later on we're going to convert it into black and white using NYX Silver Effects Pro. So as I say, there isn't much colour here at the moment, but there is a little here. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the exposure, and I'm going to increase that slightly to push some of these central tones up a little bit further into the highlight areas. And I'm going to use the white tool now just to still pull back the whites and stop them clipping. Now I've already got the clipping warnings on for the shadow and also for the highlights, so any areas that start to clip, we'll start to see them colour up as either red or blue. I'll just show you what I mean here. If I push that up, you can see the clipping starts to occur as a red highlight. Okay, so I'm going to leave that nice and bright, and I'm going to also reduce down the shadow sliders slightly, and that gives me there a little bit more depth of black in the water. Now the other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a negative clarity. Now the idea of the negative clarity is to make the foliage glow a little bit more. That's the halation effect that you used to see with some of the old infrared films like Kodak HIE. So it's very hard to simulate properly using a negative clarity, but we'll take a look at a step in NYX Silver Effects Pro that, when combined with the negative clarity, actually helps the halation effect. The other change that I'll make here is just to do some detail sharpening. So I'll just zoom in here on an area of the image. I'm just going to sharpen that up a little bit more and use the detail slider there, and I'm going to use the masking tool just to reduce the sharpening to concentrate it just onto the edges. So what masking does is it stops the sharpening effect being applied to the entire image and just keeps it on concentrated onto the strongest edges in the image. That way you can sharpen a little bit more aggressively without introducing any noise. I'm also probably going to introduce a little bit of luminance noise reduction, and there we go. Okay, so that's the start of the image. you can take a look at that compared to the previous image, and we've already got something that looks quite close to what you would expect from more traditional films. What I'm going to do next is switch to using Photoshop to edit this image, and once we're in Photoshop I'm going to start to apply Nik Silver Efex Pro. Here we are now with the image in Photoshop, and up here you can see we've got the Nik Selective tool open. This is the tool that allows us to start the Nik filters. Nik filters used to cost a lot of money, but Google recently took the decision to make them free. So if you don't already have these installed, head over to Google, search for Nik Collection, and then go to the Nik website where you can download the tools for free. Once you've got them installed, you'll start to see things such as this selective tool, and we're going to use the Silver Efex Pro, which is the black and white converter. So if we click on that, we find that Silver Efex Pro opens, pre-processes the image, and here we are with the default conversion to black and white. Over on the left you'll see a number of presets you can use, and some of these might give a good conversion, such as that one, and others you might think don't give a good conversion. It really does depend on what you're trying to create. I'm going to start really for this example just with the default neutral conversion, and I'm going to start to then adjust some of the settings we can use over here on the right panel. So the first thing I want to do is to emphasize the blacks in the image a little bit more. Okay, as I do that, you can see that that reduces the glowing white effect, which may have been a little bit too strong. You can also use the white adjustments here to amplify whites and bring out a little bit more of the reflections in the water. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the soft contrast, and I'm going to push that up to the right, and you'll notice as I do that, that really does start to highlight the glowing effect on the leaves, very much like halation that you got on some of the old infrared films. The image overall is just a little bit too bright for my taste. Now you could use this highlight slider just to reduce the effect on the highlights, and we might do that in a moment, but first I want to try to use the dynamic brightness slider just to reduce the brightness a little bit. And now if we use the highlight slider as well, it tones the image down quite nicely, and again we can still push up the soft contrast a little bit further. Try not to use the contrast itself too much, as it can be quite damaging to the effect. The other sliders to watch out for are the structure sliders. If you increase the structure, you lose the halation effect, so it can be quite good to add a little bit of negative structure in here. And by adding some mid-tone structure, you can actually control some of the elements of the image, and again the shadow structure is quite good for bringing out the detail in the black reflections. The other thing that you should consider doing is adding a vignette. If I add a reasonably soft vignette, which is a lens fall off 1, I can create quite a nice look to the image. So there we are. If I compare that with the starting image, which is a little bit lacking in contrast and depth, the new image definitely takes on the old infrared look. The final thing that you might want to do as well is add in some grain into the image. So I'm going to actually make this quite a grainy image, but I want to use soft grain. If I try to use too hard a grain, it will make the image look a little bit too coarse, and that's probably the grain effect that I need. Okay, once you're happy with the image, so I'll just compare that again. Yep, I like that. You can then just click OK and the image is saved back to Photoshop. And there we are with our infrared conversion in Photoshop.